Back to the part two of the character final demonstration video. Now you can kind of tell that the character that I'm working on here is a little bit further along. That's because I actually recorded and finished up the video. Unfortunately, I had a blackout just as it was saving, so I did not get to save that video. Well, yeah, things happen, I guess. So let me try to go through those steps again. Hopefully, there's a very little amount of missing information from the last video onto this one. So in the last video, I think that we left off where you guys we talked about adding a wash using multiply blend mode to add a nice almost watercolor like wash of color on your character or the illustration that you're working on, and then used overlay to add more of a saturation to the color and kind of make it pop out more, give you a really nice illustration. Colors within your illustration. Now, in this version that I have in front of me now, we're a little bit further along where after using those colors, I started to kind of paint on top of it, adding a bit more of, softening up the renders, establishing the planes a little bit, adding some extra colors here and there using other blend modes. So yeah, I think that's pretty much where I got to here. Of course, I went even further than that, but let me talk about the steps to get you to this final form right over here. All right, so once you do everything that was done in the last video, I pretty much just used a hard brush using a brand new layer, and of course, the clipping mask, Option Command G or Alt Control G, to create a clipping mask onto our main working layer right over here. And just use the hard brush with opacity toggle on. I tend to work at 100%. And I start establishing the planes just a bit more. The planes meaning, like the little corners of the face where the bone structures are, so that you could get a better understanding of how the light will reflect onto it. So using a brush and having my finger down on the Option or Alt so I could pick up colors, I just begin to sort of just clean up some areas and just smooth everything out. At this stage, I also start adding in some more details to the face, reworking some areas, like for example the eyes, the eyebrows, a bit of the eyes, restructuring that lip because right here, so it looks a little bit wild. So holding down an Option or Alt, I'm going to pick up the colors around it and sort of just phase the areas that you don't want out. Like I said, we're also establishing a bit more planes. So for those of you who don't understand planes, as I mentioned earlier, the planes are basically just the structure of the face. For example, we have the face here. If we break it down, here's one plane, pretty much the cheek. Let me use a different color. Here's one plane. If you look at the nose, and if you break it down using the basic shapes, plane here and another plane here. Basically, the areas are facing in different directions. So let's say we add the light right in front, then these areas are going to be hit with the light a lot more than areas that are facing or planes that are facing away from the light source. So it's always good to kind of either look at your references, which I have right over here, as well as some of your inspirations / references here to help you along the process. Again, just use the hard brush, my go-to brush, hold down Option or Alt to pick up the colors and values, and just start kind of reshaping everything in your illustration and cleaning everything up. I mentioned this earlier, probably in the last video, that the steps that I used here can be used for anything and not just the characters. You can use this for environments, a combination of boat, spaceships, robots, what have you. It's the same process. But this process isn't the only thing that you could do to, create a finished illustration. There are definitely other ways. Look up your favorite artist and see what their process is, and maybe you could add that into your repertoire. I'm just cleaning up the eye area here. And as mentioned in the prior version of this, where I kind of finished that up already, I also use some other blend modes to add some more colors within the illustration so that you get more, more variety and not just the base color that we added earlier. Alright, so once you're happy cleaning it up just a little bit, as you can see here, that literally took a couple of minutes just to do some cleanup. I'm going to merge it down, and I want to add some more colors. So let's explore some of the other blend modes that you could use to hopefully add more colors into it. We've already talked about multiply, which is a great for adding the wash, as well as adding shadows, and also overlays to make things more saturated, as well as to add some special effects to it. Now let's talk about something like soft light. Soft light is another great blend mode in that it adds color very similarly to overlay, except a bit more subtle. For example, let's say we want to add a little bit of blush onto the cheek. So let's get some red. And then let's set this brand new layer to soft light. So using red and a soft brush, let me lower the opacity so that you can control the output just a little bit more. I'm going to start brushing on some red color. Now, remember, everything that you do will affect every single layer. So if we go to purple, it's going to affect that color differently than it would the red right over here. So everything that you put down interacts with all the colors underneath. Now, the way to control that is by using the clipping mask like this. Now, if it didn't tab that clipping mask, everything would be pretty much affected, including the background layers and other layers underneath it. So it's always good to do a clipping mask. Remember, it's Option Command G or Alt Control G for the PC. Alright, so this is set to soft light, and definitely utilize the opacity of each layer so you can control the amount that you want in there, because you don't want it to be like really red blushing like this. Maybe you can lower the opacity. Now let's look at the difference between soft light and an overlay. In overlay, you notice how saturated and how blown out that color is. Soft light is a bit subtler. So you want that if you want to start adding in some nuanced colors in there, like the blush, maybe add more saturation to some colors without it being too strong. You can do that as well. So that's soft light right here. So we can also use soft light. Maybe to take red and bump up that red lip right over here. Another great thing to use with soft light is that it helps take away that grayish tone that you could sometimes come across when you guys are blending in the multiply and overlay. So, for example, if we go down here, you see how grayish some areas are, and even on the face here, like around the nose, you see like that grayish tone. It's not as rich with color as you would using overlay and multiply already. So here, I'll use the soft light. Actually, let me create a brand new layer. That's a really good thing to do. So that you can isolate different areas so that if you don't like it, you can just, throw it out and start a brand new layer again. So let me try to replace those grayish, brownish, kind of muddy colors here with something a little bit nicer. So let me pick on the skin here, and then let me just use something a little bit darker like this, and just kind of brush it on. See how you soften everything up? But maybe that's not too much. I want to add more red to it. So I'll go down in red, choose a more mahogany looking color, and just brush that in. Oh, I forgot to set it to soft light. There you go. And just paint that in. See how much richer that color is now compared to how it was before? So you could definitely do that using soft light. And if I do it all throughout, you're just going to get a much richer color variation. And as always, you could go to opacity, lower it if you'd like, just so you could control that. And the great thing, as you've already kind of noticed, you can stack up as many of the blend modes as you can. So I created another layer into the clipping stack and set it to overlay. So now let me add some more brightness to the face here. I'm going to pick this reddish beige color, and then I'm going to add a bit more brightness all around. You could do this in layers, so you could do it in one layer. It's really up to you. For example, I'm going to take some purple. I'm going to really add some more highlights here. And good. And then once you're done, merge it together. I don't know if I talked about this in the last video, but I definitely did in the prior version of part 2. But you could create checkpoints for yourself as you work. For example, let's say you're really liking what's happening here, but you want to try something out. What you want to do is to take it, drag it into the new layer, and copy that layer so that you have 2 versions of that layer. So you could turn everything off here, and then you could work on that layer again. If you mess up, you don't like it, you could throw it away. You still have the prior version here. So like I said, you're basically creating checkpoints for you. So that as you're working and you decide you don't really like it, you could go back to a prior version a bit. So that's a really good way to kind of work so that you don't find yourself having to redo things in huge portions. You could just go back in time a couple of steps and so on. And then if you really like it, let's say you want to keep a minimum or maximum of 5 checkpoints. If you really like it, merge it down and then go on. So that's what I'm going to do. Copy, turn this off. I have a brand new thing here to work on. So at this point here, I'm going to continue painting. Now I highly suggest utilizing the layer, create a brand new layer, and just continue painting and smoothing everything out. Now when you guys are painting, do not expect, use the hard brush right away, do not expect to spend like, I don't know, 20 minutes. I mean, you can, if you guys are fast workers, great. But if you guys watch the speed paint videos from other artists, those are definitely what they are, speed paint videos. They sometimes spend a whole lot of time on it, hours, 6+ hours sometimes on a character or a painting. That's pretty much condensed in that 6 minutes. So don't stress too much if it's taking you a while. In fact, if it's taking you a while, that means that you really, really care for the illustration and you want to spend as much time on it as possible. So do not stress too much if it's not taking you like 10 minutes to complete something. So as you're painting, you're just adding more things, reshaping areas like here. Maybe the chin's a little bit too big. So I'm going to take the surrounding colors and then just shape the chin up just a little bit. Again, this is the perfect time to just go to your references and see how exactly your favorite artist or your inspiration does it. In a prior version, I think I talked about, taking some inspiration. For example, like the little hair here from this references and just included it here. So you could do that, pull a bunch of references for yourself to get inspired by or to pull from, and just take bits and pieces and include it into your illustration and make it as original as possible. Like here in the armor area, I could definitely use some areas, references of armors. for female characters that would have helped me along the process here. And something that you want to do while you're painting is that you want to add in the shadows, but more of a local shadow, like the ambient occlusion shadows that would help determine the position of your light source, your key light source, your key light. However, don't do too much shadows that, like, don't focus in on the shadows too much, let's say on the face, and then focus in on the body. You want to do that main shadow part on a separate layer later on, and I'll show you that as well. A shadow layer and a light layer. That's because you want to keep things pretty consistent, right? If you work on the face and then you move on to the body, sometimes they don't really connect because, you're focused on one thing at a time and there's no consistency in between them. So we could definitely do that shadow later on. For now, the shadows that you are paying attention to are just the local shadows that will just, sort of hint where that light source is going to be. For example, here, I could add in a little bit the shadow here that the nose is going to make, because I know I want my light source to be right up front. So I'm not doing too much of it. I'm just kind of sort of just indicating where it's going to be. Cleaning up that hair a little bit. No opacity. Just a little bit more shadow. I want that. Give her a really nice area here. Shadowy cheekbone. Another thing that you don't want to do is to add in too much highlights right away. You want to reserve that towards the end. Stuff like main shadow, highlights, and lighting themes and colors. You want that towards the end because if you flatten everything up and you need to change something, then you're just going to have a lot of trouble, trying to revert back to a prior version of it. Unless, of course, you do things like what I'm doing here by copying and pasting the versions of what you're working on, so you can revert back to that. Sort of like like a time machine for the Mac. And for those of you who work on Macs, like treat it like a little time machine. It's a little too dark. I want it a little bit lighter. And for this one, I really want her to have red eyes for some reason, so I'm just going to put that in. Put a little pupil in there. I'll give it a little speck here, but nothing else. Well, maybe I'll reserve that for later. There you go, just a little bit down. Alright, let's say that you're done with this. I could definitely see some areas here that needs to be colors need to be added on just a little bit, like a little soft light in the cheek, put back into the cheek, soft light, just so I could get rid of that grayish tint and merge down. So now let's add in a bit of shadow, right? So we talked about the local shadows that we did earlier, but now let's do the overall shadow mapping. So it's pretty easy. You can do this for the characters as well as for environments, the whole illustration. It's a really good way to add shadows without having it be too overly complicated by doing it like a painter would, like actually painting the shadows in. So what we're going to do is to add a clipping mask to this. Option Command G or Alt Control G again, and then let's take the paint bucket tool and let's add in a shadow. So in this case, I'm going to use a purpley color just to make it a little bit more cohesive. And since it's a clipping mask, it just pretty much clips itself to this shape right over here. So now let's take this shape and let's set it to multiply. So instant shadows. It's like you basically just turned off the lights. So at 100%, that's basically what it looks like. So what we want to do now is to make sure you highlight that shadow layer and then turn on your masking layer. Turn it into a layer mask. So now a little thumbnail, a white thumbnail should be created right next to your shadow layer right over here. Now, if you don't or are not familiar with the layer mask yet, please refer to the demonstration videos that I posted earlier in the semester. And also, if you're still not comfortable with it, you can also use an eraser. Now, the advantage to working with a masking layer, a layer mask, is the fact that, or a vector mask, is the fact that you can kind of erase away things temporarily only, and you can bring it back anytime that you like. With eraser, you can, once you erase it, it's pretty much gone. You have to go back in history just to undo things. So, for those of you who remember how layer mask works, make sure to click on the thumbnail, the white thumbnail here, and instead of using the eraser, we're using the brush. So once you have the brush, you're going to see that your swatches turn from black and white. So black means take away, so I'm erasing away the contents of this layer, and white will bring it back again. So that's a really good thing. It's not like an eraser, it's like a masking tool. So 100% a better way of doing things than using just normal eraser in Photoshop. Alright, so let's determine the opacity of the shadow we want. So I want not that much, maybe like this, at 37%. And then I'll go back to my masking layer and use a hard brush, opacity toggle on. I'll lower the opacity and switch back to black so you can start mapping out your shadows. So again, we want our light source to be here, right? It's right in front of her. So every plane that is away from the light source is going to get more of the shadow. So for example, here you're going to get a little bit more. In this plane you are. This plane. This part of the hair is definitely going to get more light. Maybe a little bit of side here. Here. This portion of the shoulder pad. Make the brush bigger. This part of the breastplate. The rib cage area here. Instant shadow right here. So if I turn this off and on, you could kind of see the difference. Now going back to the white, let's say I want to add a little bit more shadow along the overlap of the hair. So go back to white and just paint that shadow back on. See how that works? And you can switch back to black so you can start erasing things again. Alright, that's pretty good. Once you're done, you can leave it as is until you're ready to commit to it. But for the sake of the demo, let's just merge everything together. Let's say I really like it. It's pretty good. But like I said, if you're not ready to commit yet, and you want to maybe add the light first before merging everything together, you could do that. So let's do that with the light. So to add light, we're going to do the same thing. We create a brand new layer, Option Command G, and allow it to hit the same stack. So you could hit Option Command G right on top of it, or you could drag a brand new layer onto the stack here so that it'll stay within the clipping stack. So let's determine the light source, and the color of the light source really depends on your environment. If you don't have an environment and you're just showcasing a character, you could definitely invent a color, or whatever color you'd like. However, if your environment is going to be set in the desert at the daytime, then maybe you want something of warmer colors to use as the light source. So let the environment, especially for illustration 233, let the environment that you've done in the prior modules to determine the type of color that you're going to use for the light source. So for this one, let's say she is going to be in the desert. So I'm going to have to choose warmer colors. So when you choose warmer colors, bright, desaturated colors of the one you're using is probably the best way to go. And then set that layer to overlay. So from here, I'll use a soft brush, lower opacity. Here I'm using 54%, and just kind of brush it on. To bring in that light source. So it's like you just turned on the light. See how really nice that is? And the great thing is, again, opacity, layer opacity, you can lower the opacity if it's a little bit too much. You don't have to stick with that warm light source. You can add a variety of light source in there to make it as rich as possible as well. And afterwards, let's say I'm ready to commit, I could merge it. I could put it in a group, Command G or Alt G or Control G, so it's its own group now, so that you don't have to worry about that amount of layer. You could just, let's say, rename it character with light and shadow, right? Or like I said, if you're ready to commit, just merge. And then from here, I could copy and paste again, turn that off so I have a brand new version. And then what I do, I just continue painting again. So now that you have your light source and your shadows pretty much set up, I'll go back in there just so that I could finish up the cleanup and add more details if needed. Here I'm just paying attention to the nose, make sure it's really nice and good. For softening it up and making sure that everything is nicely rendered, my favorite is still the hard brush. Hard brush at a low opacity will help you blend those planes together. You do it in like a dry brush type of manner where you go in a circular way. You can even go towards the plane. So for example, if you're doing the cheekbone, you don't want to go up and down. You want to follow that shape. And then use a circular motion to sort of just lightly blend everything together. Pick up the colors around it, blend. Pick up the colors around it, and then blend. Pick up, blend. Pick up, blend. So let's look at the last version versus this one. So it's always kind of good to have a prior version, like a checkpoint version of it, just so that you can see the difference that you made. Sometimes it's really hard to see what you've done until you compare it to how it was before, right? So it's always good to kind of compare it back. Lighten this area up. And finally, well, a couple of things. What I like to do, let's say that you're 99% sure that this is it. It looks pretty good. Now let's start adding some special effects and highlights that will make the colors within the shape more cohesive than it was before, and also just adding pops of highlights in there, just to just make it really stand out. So what I like to do once I'm done with everything, take the light source that you have, maybe just orange color, and then set this one to soft light again. And then let's take our soft brush and just sort of paint it all over. Just a light blush all over the place. Just to do like a little finishing color, a soft light that will help pull all of the other colors around it and just make things just, work together. So here's with it, without it. Just, and you can lower it. It doesn't have to be like such a huge difference. Even like let's say 10%. That little bit of difference help just pull all the colors together. And then from here, if you decide to add a secondary, like a reflective light source, great. Let's say warm key light. Then you want something opposite of that, like a cool light source. Maybe the shadow side right over here is reflecting the light, like the sky, the color of the sky. So we're going for a nice pale grayish blue color. And let's help add, let me just raise the opacity here. Add a bit, let's use the hard brush. Remember, hard brush, more control of light here. Just to make that shape just a little bit more polished. And the hair, it's going to get a little bit of reflected light. Maybe the tip of the nose here. And even maybe if I finished up the armor, it's going to reflect a lot more because it's a different textured surface. It's more of a reflective surface, so it might reflect a bit more light. Then let's say the face here. It all comes down to, as I talked about before, just breaking down the shapes. Once you know how the shapes, breaking down the main shape into the basic shape. Once you know how that works, it's easy to add in any type of light source that you want. Like for example, the nose right over here. The nose is basically a sphere, right? So if I take the nose, let's just draw it in. If I take the nose like this, the tip of the nose, and add in some shadows, like this, and add in some highlights like this, and then add in that key light that's going to hit it right here, and then basically you're adding in the reflected light that's going to go in the opposite direction, like this. So that's basically just the tip of the nose. Now, if you break down every single, like the whole face and break it down into like those basic shapes, then you can add the light based on those individual shapes and just sort of just merge everything together to get the overall main structure. So break things down. If you're not comfortable like adding in the light or don't know how to add the light to the structure yet, break it down into those basic shapes. Like do yourself a favor and do that and just try to like, get into your head how this works. And eventually you don't even need to break it down anymore. You're just gonna know exactly how the light's going to hit something, and you'll be better for it. So it's just one of those things that you're just gonna practice and get into a habit of doing. Another thing I would add in, aside from the reflective light source, are the highlights. Those are the things that really make things pop. So not everything will get a highlight. Don't go all highlight happy because not everything is the same type of texture or surface. For example, the eye here is probably going to be the wettest part of the face, so it's going to get that really nice highlight. And then another thing is probably the nose, because that's probably going to be the more the least the most stretched out area of the skin, because it's pretty much cartilage down here. And maybe you can get a little highlight here, a highlight there. Maybe the insides right here near the tear ducts. I'm just gonna get a little bit of light. Just a little area here between the nose. I didn't make this up. Looking at a bunch of references allowed me to kind of see how this happens. So another point for using references is that it allows you to see and help you figure out where everything and how everything works. So don't be afraid of those references. I'll just keep on repeating that. So a little bit of white goes a long way. Now, see how much I held back on the highlights? Now, let's say it's a brand new armor. Totally different. Now, those are going to get really nice bright highlights. Totally different from what the face is. Right? Even the hair might get a little bit of highlight if it's really, really shiny. So for this, I'm going to utilize the lasso tool. Just add a little bit of sheen here. Just draw in like a selection. On a brand new layer, I'm going to use a soft brush and just add in a little highlight there. You can deselect it. And then let's just take the eraser and just do a bit of a lost and found. Like erase some areas, soften some of the edges here. And just not make it like a solid object, just erase some parts so it's like hitting some strands but not all. So utilize whatever Photoshop has to offer to help you complete your illustration. I'm not saying use a filter. Don't use filters all of a sudden just to give texture to something. Find a way to add textures that will help round out your form. Like let's see if I could just look something up here. Let's say textured metal. Or rusty metal. Maybe rusty metal would look good. You can look for metal textures online, drag it into your desktop so you have a really nice texture. I'm going to convert this into black and white. And then I'm going to go to Image, Adjustment Levels. I'm going to give it a nice contrast. Command T to transform or free transform to lower the transformation. And then what we're going to do we're going to implement it into our illustration. So here, let me just flatten everything up to this point, and we have our little area here, a little texture. Let's turn this into a clipping mask. So highlight that texture, Option Command G or Alt Control G. This is now a texture, and set it to multiply. Lower the opacity, and you have yourself a really nice texture. Now don't just rely on just doing this. Go to Edit, Transform. You can use Distort to make it appear like that texture is rounding out into the shoulder pad. You can also use Image, Adjust, Edit, Transform. You can use Warp. Warp is a really good one. And just round that texture out so that it's not just sitting flatly on an otherwise like nice illustration here. I mean a rendered shape. Rounded, rendered, three-dimensional shape. And from here, I'm going to use my eraser, or you could use your vector mask or layer mask. And I'm just going to keep the textures within the metal parts of the armor. And then you could go on, add maybe a skin texture, patterns you could do this with as well. Don't just use multiply, you could use blend modes. You don't have to turn it into a black and white image. You can add in the colors in there, like for example, like let's say you want a rusty armor. Keep it as is. You don't have to convert it into black and white. You could set this one to, let's say, overlay. That looks pretty good. And then just lower the opacity. So you get little bits and pieces of texture in there. And erase away and just have it be in that area. So you now have a really nice textured surface here. But as always, don't just rest on that Command E after you merge things together or on a brand new layer. Just start working everything in. Start painting, adding in some of those brush strokes. Keep working on it. Afterwards, get some critique from your fellow classmates or from me to help you determine whether or not you should be finished if you don't know where to stop. Because, I mean, I think a lot of us, especially artists, just don't know when to, finish an illustration. So sometimes it's good to get a second opinion from your peers and, see whether or not it's time to call this pretty much a day. And then, as you're finishing it up, maybe you're like, okay, I could add a couple more things here, add some more colors here, some patterns here. That's definitely okay. You can continue adding on. You don't have to stay within the shapes of your original silhouette. You can add more stuff to it. Maybe you decide, okay, I want to add maybe a collar. Like a larger collar here. That's really good too. And you definitely could do that. However, try to do most of your, setting up during the early stages so that you don't have to add anything on last minute. But if you must and you want to, there's no stopping you. definitely add on to it. Let it be the best version of an illustration as it could be. Maybe a little color here. Maybe just like an earpiece. So yeah, just keep building onto it. Make sure it matches the environment that you're working with. For illustration 660, they basically the same process. You just didn't have the luxury of maybe doing it in steps like illustration 233, but it's the same thing. You're still working with a character or characters within an environment and how they stay within that environment. All right. I may not do an add-on to this video series with the characters, or do a separate one with a, um, I guess, showcasing how you go about doing fire and glows and special effects. I might do that in another video as well. All right. So look forward to that. Hopefully this saves, and yeah, hope it helps you guys out. All right. Thanks, everybody.